Welcome to today's webinar. Today we have three panelists who are going to talk about their work in combining American Community Survey data with other data sources. When we surveyed ACS data users last fall, this is actually the topic that people were most interested in hearing more about. So we invited three experts to talk about their specific applications. Today we have Jonathan Fisher, a research scholar at the Stanford Center on Poverty and Inequality. He's going to talk about a project where he combines ACS data with personal bankruptcy records. Stephen Tordella, president of Decision Demographics, will give a presentation on his work combining ACS data with SNAP records. And Tom Godfrey, also with Decision Demographics, is going to describe some work where he combined ACS PUMS data with other sources to produce estimates and projections of librarians. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jonathan.
I'm going to talk about a Census Research Data Center project that is ongoing, and it's part of joint work with Tall Gross, Matt Noda-Wadigdo, and Jilan Wang, where we are bringing in public personal bankruptcy records and matching it to the American Community Survey and to other Census Bureau data sets. So let me tell you why we look at personal bankruptcy. In our view, it's part of the social insurance system that in the U.S. If you look at the number of recipients of personal bankruptcy, it's relatively small compared to other social insurance programs, like you can think of welfare, temporary assistance, maybe families or food stamps. Those have, and Medicaid, those have much bigger number of recipients. Then we also have it by dollars transferred in billions. So this is a personal bankruptcy within the social insurance system. And then lastly, you can look at how much dollar benefits the recipients receive, how much the dollar benefit per recipient. And there, personal bankruptcy provides the largest benefit. It transfers almost $50,000 to recipients. And this is the dollar benefit is really debt forgiven. That in personal bankruptcy, you can have all of your unsecured debt that is not tied to a durable piece of a durable good like a car or a home. You can get that debt forgiven. So you can get medical debt and credit card debt forgiven. And so on average, a personal bankruptcy filer has about $50,000 forgiven in bankruptcy. Now, all these other social insurance programs are usually discussed in surveys, but in bankruptcy is not actually discussed in the federal statistical system. It is not actually part of any federal survey. And so this slide is a nod to my friend at Texas A&M. First time I presented this, I just had a blank slide, and they were a little confused, so they wanted a tumbleweed going across a road. So that's what I'm showing here, is that there is nothing on personal bankruptcy in the federal statistical system. There are some private surveys that ask about personal bankruptcy. So the panel studies income dynamics asked about it once in 1996, and that survey has about 500 personal bankruptcy users. And the National Longitudinal Survey of Youth also did it, and so you can find out a little bit information there, but there's nothing in the federal statistical system. So what we did is personal bankruptcy records are public information. The bankruptcy courts provide electronic access through a PACER system, public access to court electronic records. So if you know someone who filed for personal bankruptcy, you can go online, or if you want to search, you can go to the PACER website, and you can go search their name and find out whether that person filed for bankruptcy. But if you want a large number of filings, if you wanted to just go and get all of them, you actually have to pay 10 cents per page to get this information. And so my co-authors on the project, when they were graduate students, got a fee waiver. They were all graduate students in the time, and got a fee waiver and downloaded about 20 million personal bankruptcy records between 1992 and 2011. And so they captured about 80% of all filings over this time. Now, the next slide, when I presented this when I was a Census Bureau employee, I was a little nervous about doing it, but just because it makes Census nervous when I show the slide. But I'll just say that what I'm about to show you is all public information. that anyone could go on the web and find. And I ended up blocking a little bit of it out. But this is what, if you go through the PACER system and you download all this information, this is what you see. So on this pacer.gov, you'll get people's full names, their address, and the last 4 digits of their social security number. And you can see Eddie was someone who filed for bankruptcy. Let's see, you can see he had we know his attorney's name was Morris Newman, and we know he filed for bankruptcy on May 6, 2009, and the bankruptcy was discharged on October 14, 2009. So we have all this information. So we then extracted it from the PDF files and then put it into SAS and sent it to the Census Bureau. And the Census Bureau is able to match it and add what they call a personal identification key. So because the bankruptcy data have name, address, and last 4 digits of file social security number, the Center for Administrative Record Research and Applications was able to add a PIC, the personal identification key. It's the analog to a social security number, but is internal to the Census Bureau. So with a little bit of money, we were able to get the personal bankruptcy data picked, and we got about, not everyone was able to be picked. The people from the 90s just have a lower likelihood of being picked, but people more recent were more likely to get a pick. But about half of the people, half of the 20 million were received a pick. Then, what's important is this type of match at the person level can only be done at census research data centers. And so this is research that we're doing in a secure research facility. Actually, I don't remember how many there are. There are about 15 in the U.S. right now, but it's growing by 2 or 3 every year. And so we applied for access, where we described the purpose of the project and said the type of research we wanted to do. And then the project was approved, and then CARA picked the data. And then we're able to access the data within the Census Research Data Center within a secure facility that is officially a Census Bureau office. And so I do that out of the Stanford Research Data Center. So if you want to find out more about RDC research, you can go to the link at the bottom. You can look at the census.gov/CES/RDC research. So what we matched it to is the 2001 through 2009 American Community Surveys. We also have it matched to the 2000 decennial and some of the SIP panels, but I'll talk mainly about the ACS today. So the RDC version of the ACS has a pick on it for those that could be picked. So anyone, not everyone in the ACS could be picked. Anyone who doesn't have a social security number, so if someone is not in the U.S. legally and doesn't have a social security number or a tax ID, then that person probably couldn't be picked. There are also people who, if they've never worked, may also have a harder time finding a pick for that person. But for everyone that has, we match everyone that has a pick in the bankruptcy data to the ACS. And what I'm going to talk about is how we actually ended up using this data, because I think there's standard ways where you can say, oh, someone filed it was in the ACS in 2007, so we can look at whether they filed for bankruptcy in 2007 and look at contemporaneous information. But we also wanted to use it in non-traditional ways, where the pick allows us to match the person from the census data, even regardless of what year they filed for personal bankruptcy. So we know if someone was in the 2007 ACS, we know, and if they filed for bankruptcy in 1997, we know their demographic information. So we know what the person's race and education was in 1997. And then we could also use age. We also know, the RDC version of the ACS has the person's actual date of birth, and so we can figure out their age when they filed for bankruptcy. And then the other way we use it is for, let's say, for a specific person, we know that she filed for bankruptcy in 2008. She appeared in the 2007 ACS, so we know her income actually 2 years before filing for bankruptcy, because the ACS asked about income in the previous year. So we know income about in the year 2 years before bankruptcy. And so we can use this kind of a pseudo panel to figure out different things about the people. So let me talk about one result of what we did is we have the distribution bankruptcy filers by age. So we just put them in 5-year age bins, and we have it for 1997, 2004, and 2011. Again, using whatever, regardless of what year they were in the ACS, we know, we just took their date of birth. And so we see that the bankruptcy filers have been getting older. The distribution has been moving toward older ages, and it's actually getting older faster than the U.S. as a whole. So there's a shift in the bankruptcy filers toward older ages filing for bankruptcy. It's less people in their 20s, and it's now more people in their late 40s, 50s, and 50s. The other interesting thing that we were able to do with this is there's a big spike in quarterly bankruptcy filings. So what I'm showing in this figure is just the number of quarterly bankruptcy filings in hundreds of thousands. In the fourth quarter of 2005, there was a spike in bankruptcy filings. So there were over 600,000 personal bankruptcy filings in that one quarter, while before that the peak was a little over 400,000. And then it fell precipitously after that. And then kind of leveled off. And so the reason for that is Congress passed and the President signed the Bankruptcy Abuse Prevention and Consumer Protection Act called BAPCPA. It was passed on April 20th, 2005, and then it was effective on October 17th, 2005. So those 600,000 bankruptcy filers in the fourth quarter of 2005, most of them filed between October 1st and October 16th. There's just a dramatic rise in the number of bankruptcy filers in that quarter because the bankruptcy law made it harder to file for bankruptcy and made it more onerous. It was more expensive, and there are other aspects that just made it less desirable to file for bankruptcy once the law became effective. And so what we're able to do is look at how things changed around BAPCPA. So in this figure, 0 is the week that BAPCPA was in force, so the week of October 17, 2005. Now remember from the first figure I showed you, there was a large spike in the number of filers, but the race distribution basically stayed the same. So in the run-up to bankruptcy, BAPCPA, there was always around 70% of bankruptcy filers were white, around 20% were black. But after BAPCPA passed, that changed dramatically. There was a tremendous dip in the percent of bankruptcy filers that were white, and then a similar rise in the percent that were black. And so we can also see similar patterns by education and age as well. I just don't show them here. And so we're trying to figure out, well, what does this mean about the financial savviness of people, or what does this, did lawyers do a better job of reaching out to white people in advance of BAPCPA? We're trying to understand what we can take from this result. But this is what the ACS allows us to do, a lot match to this bankruptcy records. And the last question we're just working on now is what happens in the years before and after bankruptcy. So what causes bankruptcy? Is income falling? Are people losing their jobs? Are people becoming disabled? Are there health shocks? And then after bankruptcy, what's happening? Bankruptcy appears on your credit report for up to 10 years. So one thing we're also looking at is what happens when this bankruptcy flag is removed from your credit report. Are you more likely to get credit? So we're going to proxy it with, are you more likely to become a homeowner 10 years after bankruptcy? Are you more likely to become self-employed after bankruptcy? So what I'm going to show you is just a figure here. This is, we're still working on this, and so this is actually just made up numbers that I just did. So this is not actual results that have come out of the RDC, but this is what we're hoping to see when we finish this work. We're working with the ACS and designing out right now to do this type of work, but I'm just showing you what we can do. So along the x-axis is relative to the year you filed. So year 0 is the year you filed for bankruptcy. And so negative numbers are the years before bankruptcy, and positive numbers are the year after. And what we're expecting to see is that the percent of people who are self-employed before bankruptcy is going down. So this is maybe people who are self-employed, but their business fails, and so they end up no longer being self-employed. They either go to unemployed, or if they're lucky, they get a job with someone else. And we expect that to be going down before bankruptcy, and then stable, and then level off. And then what we're hoping to see is that after the bankruptcy in year 10, when bankruptcy is no longer on your credit report, that the percent of people who are self-employed begins to increase, because now they can start getting access to credit that they couldn't when the bankruptcy flag appeared on their credit report. And so we can use this nature of the bankruptcy data with the ACS to figure out how people, what happens before and after bankruptcy. And again, the only way this is possible is, we don't have, I'm showing 25 years of data, and obviously we don't have 25 years of the ACS. It works because we know someone who filed for bankruptcy in 1995 and then appeared in the 12 years later in the 2007 ACS. So, so merging at the person level can be done within the Census RDC network. Again, that's the website that you can go to learn more about the RDC. If you want to match at the person level, your external data needs two of the three: name, address, and social security number. And those can get you, a decent pick. And even without, in our project, I don't even think we ended up using the last 4 digits of the social security number. I think it was mainly just name and address. And then within the Census RDC network, you can also merge things at the census block or tract level. So, if it's, so one other RDC project is bringing in school boundaries and looking at how close people live to school boundaries, or bringing in crime data at the census block level. So, there are things you can do within RDC. You can get access to different variables where you can match their data at different levels than you could in the public use. And as I said, this research is very early. And if you want to, if you're interested in it, you can always email me, and you can always follow as we get papers and start writing papers. I'll update it on my website. So thank you.
Great. Thanks very much, Jonathan. We are going to keep moving right along here. And next up, we have Stephen Tordella, who's going to talk about SNAP data.
Jonathan's talk is actually an excellent lead-in to mine, because I work inside the Census Bureau. I went in 2010, and I still haven't completely emerged. I'm there 3 days a week. And I'm with that same CARA group, the Center for Administrative Records Research. And I've done things with SNAP, and we also did things with foreclosures and SIP, and merged block and tract data onto SIP data, similar to what Jonathan mentioned. So I'm going to talk about SIP data acquisition, what the Census Bureau wants to do with the data, how they approach it through data sharing agreements with states, because these data, the SNAP data, food stamp data, belong to states. They don't belong to the federal government. And we went through and created a routinized process for data prep, and we'll talk about the output of that process and urge you to get this for your own state. SNAP is the largest domestic food program, serving over 46 million people in 2014. It grew straight through the Great Recession, and afterwards kept on growing through the jobless recovery, and only in the past year or so dropped by about 1 million people. From a study of dynamics that we just finished with the SIP data set, we can tell you that the median new participant who entered SNAP during 2008 to 2012 stayed 12 months. And this is about, it's 2 months more than even in the mid-2000s. But if you look at, instead of looking at new participants, if you look at existing participants, people who were on SNAP before SIP started and maybe stayed on right through, the median length is 8 years. Another interesting finding is that nearly half of people on SNAP who leave SNAP return within a year. So the Census Bureau has a lot of plans, and they have great goals for this SNAP data. They'd like to evaluate and improve their survey data, say the coverage that SIP has of SNAP. They want to improve their record linkage methods, and Jonathan talked about that record linkage. And most importantly, they'd like to carry out some research and planning for the 2020 census that's underway, and understand program participation and pursue a joint research program with the Economic Research Service, also part of the USDA, along with the Food and Nutrition Service that administers the SNAP program. So they start off with just a letter of support from Food and Nutrition Service. That is a major accomplishment, if you can believe it. And there's a standard template that the Bureau brings to states to agree with them how their data will be safeguarded and treated and who will have access. And also, it also lays out a standard set of tables that the states will get when they send their data along. The data sharing agreements, well, there's been a lot of recruiting going on at the Census Bureau, but it's very slow going. State people in the last couple of years are very busy establishing Obamacare. It affects more than, well, many of the programmers that we would deal with, though we being the Census Bureau, were very busy with Obamacare last year. So what we were trying to achieve was a routinized process for data preparation. Got to produce the same profile for every state. We need a process for receiving the SNAP data because there is no standardized, just like the states own the data, they can determine what the software is that they use to process the data. It might be their own homegrown software. Colorado uses a version of California's software, or it might be commercial. Then we want to, with each state that comes in, we want to do record validation, look at the SNAP unit composition as in the SNAP household, slightly different from the SNAP, from the regular Census Bureau household, and produce the reports. So there's actually a process that you can follow, a set of guidelines on how to most effectively acquire and use state or any other administrative data sets. And essentially, you bring it in, clean it up, standardize it, anonymize it within the Census Bureau, and then link it. But the data discovery, that's getting out there, finding out everything you can about the agency, its program, the data sets that they have, the variables in them, and the oddities in those data sets. Within the Bureau, they have a separate data intake group that imports the data and then runs basic quality control. And then you need to look at the data afterward, both before and after that, then submit it to this person identification validation system, which assigns the picks that Jonathan talked about. Then we want to create the state file and generate the tables. So we also want to know at what rates the records were validated and eligible for matching, and do the research on the program data, say compare it with how SIP counts SNAP recipiency, and compare it with ACS linked data to get both the SNAP variables from the state side and the demographics and unit composition from the ACS side. So this tells you just a little bit more about the protected identity key within the Census Bureau. I mean, essentially within the Bureau, you work with a standardized version of name and address, and that's this PIC, the protected identity key, and the MAF ID, the master address file identification code for each address. So very, very few people in the Bureau have a correspondence between Social Security number and PICs. Everybody works with things that have already been matched and merged by the Census Bureau, by CARA, the unit that Jonathan mentioned, which is a great advantage because all that matching and geocoding takes a lot of skill, and you don't need to acquire those skills and acquire all the software and know how to run the software in order to do this kind of research in the research data center context. So PICs do vary in the level at which they get assigned. The more address stable you are, the longer history you have at an address, the easier it is to assign a PIC. But if you're younger, if you're less educated, more likely to rent, more likely to move, then you're less likely to get a PIC. But the The good news is for SNAP, and the reason why the Bureau is so interested in SNAP is that it's a very, very high quality data set. If you don't cough up your Social Security number, you cannot receive the SNAP program. So we're over 99% end up with a PIC because we start with a Social Security number, and the Bureau actually identifies which Social Security numbers are wrong and adds Social Security numbers to those cases. So you lose some and you gain some, end up over 99% for New York and Colorado. The ACS, on the other hand, the Bureau can identify about 90% of people, a little less in New York, a little more in Colorado. And then we had a count of linked persons there. You can see at the bottom. So you have nearly 50,000 people in a given year of ACS that you can link to New York SNAP records. And that's quite a research data set. The Colorado link, Colorado is smaller. There's 8,000 linked people, and we're hoping to get that up to 10,000 or a little bit more when we get multiple years of Colorado data. So what the Census Bureau needs: uniformly documented, processed state data. We need to document along the way the quality of the data and the linkage itself to achieve an enhanced understanding of the SNAP program and provide the states with profile tables. The result is data files for internal applications and research, and data files that are potentially available at census research data centers. And there is a big push. There's even talk of making the Census Bureau a clearinghouse for federal data sharing. Now, it's going to be quite a bit in the future, but the Census Bureau is closer than anybody else and has a good reputation for guarding the data, safeguarding the data. Generally, data go into the Bureau, but data don't really go back outside the Bureau except through these research data centers. And there's the same link that Jonathan provided, and I actually got onto their website and counted up the current number, which is 18 research data centers. So, so for New York State, we can see the results of their merge were that we looked at the eligibility of people using ACS data, not just the ACS participation variable, but rather looking at people's profile, their income, and their living costs, and their household or SNAP unit composition, and judged from that with a synthetic model that 33% of a third of New York residents were eligible. Of those, we found 65% in the SNAP program when we matched the records. Now, ACS gets rather messy in this because a single year of ACS actually has 23 months in the observation period, in the measurement period. So if you hit the ACS, if you're asked the ACS in January, then your look back is January to December of the previous year. And if you answer in December, then it's going to be November, or let's say it's going to be the previous December through November of the current year. So it's 23 months long. It takes a little bit of fooling around to do that kind of match. So you actually have to match 2 years of administrative data to a single year of ACS data to get a complete match. There is significant variation across the state, as you can see on this slide, and across counties and races. Erie County with 71%. I'm not sure where. Well, Erie County is probably over toward the lake, if I were to guess, whereas the Bronx had over 80% participation rate. So my conclusion, after having worked inside the Census Bureau and getting at these data sets, is you should get this for your state if you work in a state context or an academic context where you can use a research data center. it will not only help you in your research and understanding of social programs, but it will also help the Census Bureau in the administration of its of things like the 2020 census, where they're under the gun really to control costs and to use everything possible to make up for, say, or to fill in with non-response follow-up and other operations. We succeeded in creating a standardized process. Now we just need a lot of states to send their data, and now the Bureau is extending this approach into WIC and TANF data. So contact information is there, and time for me to turn it over to the next person. Thank you.
Great. Thanks very much, Stephen. Last presenter is Tom Godfrey, and he's going to talk about some of the work that he's been doing with the ACS PUMs.
Well, what I'm going to do is a little bit different. My data that I'm using is all public use data. No RDC centers are involved. So it's an example of just extending what can you squeeze out of public use data. I'll be, as my title says, talking about librarian retirements, looming large. Now you may wonder why I say that. Well, 41% of librarians as of 2005 are age 50 to 59. The American Library Association, who we did this work with, first noticed this. Well, they really sounded the alarm in the early 2000s, and we've been working with them since then to kind of track and analyze what's going on. As I said, the American Library Association is who we did this work with. They have about 63,000 members. And in that previous slide, I was showing about 104,000 librarians that we had identified off of the 2005 through 2007 ACS file. Majority of librarians, about 75%, have a master's degree, and historically you basically have to have a master's degree and ALA membership to be a practicing fully card-carrying profession, member of the profession. And obviously, as I said, they had quite a concern about the looming retirements. Using not only the ACS for the 2000, what I label as the 2005 number, we also went back and used the 80, 90, and 2000 census public use microdata files to identify librarians and just track what is the trend in the number of librarians. As you can see, we went from a little over 60,000 to, in 2005, well, between 2000 and 2005, we settled in around 104,000 librarians. So you may have noticed on those slides that I use the term credentialed librarian. And that is something that we worked with the American Library Association of how do we identify librarians off of public use data. Well, we have their occupation, and then we choose they have to be a librarian, and then they also have to indicate that they've obtained a master's degree or a higher level degree from that. So who are these people? Besides having a master's degree, they're largely female, about 80%. Married, especially those in their 50s, 68% are married. Largely government unit, working for some unit of government. 2 out of every 3 librarian works for a government unit. As you might expect, that's largely K-12 schools, higher education, public and private colleges, and then also the other big employers, public libraries. There are some differences between men and women. Men tend to be working in higher education, about 45%, or they can be found in public libraries or archives. Women, their domain is the K-12 through K-12 schools, large number share in public libraries, and also higher education. So we took a little bit with this. We wanted to look at the overall view of what is the librarian market by age, what is their age composition, what's going on. I just updated this chart. We actually originally did this study in 2009, so we had this chart through 2005. Obviously a very dramatic increase in median age of librarians. And I found that very interesting yesterday, that things had totally leveled off, and you won't find that quite as surprising by the time I'm done with this talk. This chart shows just the age composition of librarians for each decade. 1990 on the left, you can see this big bubble in the 35 to 49-year-olds. By 2000, that bubble has shifted to the 45 to 59-year-olds. And 10 years later, it shifts even further over. And by 2011, you can see that that big bubble got chopped off a little bit, but we definitely have a bubble in the 55 to 64-year-olds. Now that was total, and as I said, there's some differences between men and women. And so we went and created traditional population pyramids, starting with 1980 with the PUMS data, single years of age, and you can see there's not too much of a baby boom bubble or anything, but by the year 1990, in the 35 to 45-year-old age group, there's kind of it's bulging there, especially on the female side. Now we go on to the year 2000 and 2005. It becomes quite dramatic by 2000 and around age 50, and by 2005 you can see that it's aging up to age 55. I repeat the 2005 chart now on the left side, and by 2011 you can see that that bubble is starting to flatten out a little bit, but they keep marching up. There's still a bubble up around, or a bulge around age 60 or so. And you also notice there's a fair number more librarians up around age 65 and even older than that. And we discovered that we could get some estimates of the net joiners and net leavers, or the net leavers are the retirees, which is what the American Library Association was really interested in. So, taking again our 1980 chart, we said, okay, here's the age structure in 1980. Let's just overlay that onto 1990. So we do that here. The blue is 1980, and what's left over is, in this purple, is the new librarians. And as you can see, there was quite a bit of gain in middle ages, well, between 35 and maybe 50. There's quite a bit. Obviously, there's nobody under age of 34 because, well, they're under 24 in 1980. So that's the new supply. Traditional new supply, a student go to college and get their MLS degree and enter the workforce as a librarian. Now we can also underlay this 1980 chart, and when you put it on the other side, you can see who retired. And this is what the Librarian Association was most interested in, is retirements. We can watch the retirements on the upper ages. We also did the same thing in 1990 to 2000. So here's the 1990 age structure. Overlay that on 2000. And you can again see this big gain in librarians, especially quite surprising is in age 45 to 50 in those age groups. And we're speculating that this appears that a number of women are, in particular, are joining the profession either as second careers or re-entering the workforce, that the profession seems to be quite ripe for or receptive to people joining the profession mid-career or mid-life. And again, we can look at the retirements. One of the things we notice seems to be a little more retiring going on at older ages. And one more time, we do this same drill for 1995 to 2005. So here's the 1995 chart, or pyramid, and we overlay it on 2005. And here we notice that the gains, instead of being around 45 or 50, tend to be a little bit younger. But we have, again, we're gaining new librarians, not at the youngest ages, but, you know, gaining in ages 40, 45, etc. And you can still see our bubble. There's a We gained a bunch at age 55, for example. And moving on, we can look at the retirements again. And again, you can see estimating retirements up in the older age groups. Now, one of the things they wanted, we're trying to look and use these data to get some idea of the future. So one of the things we did was calculate annualized rates of change. We calculated decennial change for each 5-year cohort. We had 3 time periods, 1980 to 90, 90 to 2000, 95 to 2005. And we broke that out by gender. This chart just shows these annualized rates of growth. I think the key thing here is you can see on the right-hand side there's some slowing of retirement, and on the left-hand side at the younger ages you see some signs of renewed growth among the younger ages. I'll just show this real quickly. We then break it out by men and women. I think the more notable thing again is since the women are driving it is the slowing of retirement on the far right-hand side, the 60-plus to 70-plus group. One of the things that caught our attention or we were thinking about is just the differences in gender, retirement, and what perhaps is the role of part-time work. Library work may be particularly suitable for part-time work. This chart probably shows way too much, but our main finding here was that part-time work is generally stable, and really only when you get into around age 70 plus does part-time work become the norm. One of the things to get a view of the future is use this information to do some projections. We applied these annualized rates of change to each age-sex cohort. We had 3 different series or 3 sets of rates for the 3 different 10-year time periods. And then being good demographers, we said, well, maybe the best projection might be averaging these 3 rates. There are a number of confounding factors, of course. The rates are based on decades when the baby boom generation moved through the ranks. For just about everything demographically and socially, baby boomers have a long history of disrupting long-held established patterns. And just the sheer size of the generation, I think, has an impact on the market. Looking into the future, will the baby boomers create new retirement patterns? As I said, we did this in 2009. The economic collapse was really starting to play through, and really just starting to hit, I think, the public sector because the budgets, because of the delay of the trend of public sector budgeting, the cuts were just starting to really hit. And then also there's the trend of, we're seeing signs of librarians maybe delaying their retirement, and also what is the spouse's role, especially as we're having this economic collapse. If a librarian loses their job, does this, well, then they're up. They've lost their job. But what if the spouse loses their job? Well, then maybe the librarian's going to keep working. Or if their spouse loses their job, maybe they're going to quit working so they can be retired with their spouse. So there's many factors. But the one thing that is we knew for sure is that no scenario will be exactly correct. But the application of past trends it provides some parameters and gives us some idea, just squeeze as much as we can out of what we have and give us some ideas of what might be plausible. What were the results? Well, as I said, we started out in 2005 with about 104,000 librarians. And you can just put some parameters. All these scenarios are pointing to that there may be some decline, small but albeit a decline in the number of librarians looking out into the future. And I just added in an update yesterday that the 2011 through 2013 ACS, we averaged 3 years of the ACS, just because we just need enough cases to stabilize it. Because just to give you an example, the 2012 ACS had 107,000, 2011 had 102, and then 2013 had about 99,000, which averages out to 102,720, or 102,720. So it's looking like maybe perhaps the decline is not quite as much as we're projecting, though it is closest to the 95 to 2005 rates that we were applying. So with that information. Again, I just want to look back here. Here's the 80, 90, 2000, 2005, and you can see that bubble of librarians moving through. This chart here, we show 2005 on the left. Remember, the bubble is just right at the cusp of retirement. And then and projections with our 3 different scenarios. And you can see how the bubble is knocked down. Things flatten out a little much more. And you can see on the far right-hand side, there's some indications that maybe retirement is being delayed. We projected out the median age. Now, I showed you at the beginning the median age, how it suddenly went flat. Well, here's what happened to the median age projected out to 2015. Interestingly, the 90 to 2000 decade here is really the only one that really shows the flattening out. Now, as I said, the librarians are interested in retirements in particular, since they lose them as members, or high due-paying members, and then become, I don't know, something more like emeritus members. So here is the projection of the number of librarians over the age of 60. So there's quite a jump from 80, 90, and 2000. It was about 10%. That jumped to 15% in 2005. And all our projection scenarios are suggesting by 2015, about 25 or even 30% of librarians are going to be over the age of 60. Then, using these pyramids, we could actually calculate the number of retirements by decade. And you can see the big jump that after averaging no more than 15,000 retirements in a decade, the 2005 to 15 period was suggesting about 28,000 retirements. And I just wanted to show the pop pyramid again in the context of what we've just talked about. Here's 2005 on the left. You got that big bubble around age 55. That starts flattening out, but things keep marching up the ages by even 2011. So they're working. There's more librarians, even at age 65. So despite the retirements looming large, I'll just add one last slide. There is some signs of significant new supply. This chart is from the National Center for Education Statistics, and it counts the number of librarian degrees deferred. We're going all the way back to 1969-70. But you can see, starting in about year 2000, the number of newly minted library science degrees has been increasing quite a bit. And so as the librarians are retiring, there is definitely a filling in on presumably the younger side, though that perhaps is even also in the middle ages, as we saw. Librarians don't all enter at age 24 upon finishing their degree. So with that, I guess I took a little bit more than my allotted time. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Tom. We do have a few questions that have come in. We have about 7 more minutes, so I'll go through those fairly quickly. One question, I guess there's 2 questions here, but I'll combine them into one. There was a question about where the bankruptcy data were obtained from, and Jonathan, had you considered using county-level bankruptcy data, which the person who asked this acknowledges that it's probably not as robust as what you did, but pointed out that those data may be available to people.
So the bankruptcy data came from the website pacer.gov, pacer.gov. And we haven't thought about supplementing it with some research in personal bankruptcy has used along with the National Longitudinal Survey of Youth to kind of as to bolster each other. So, but we haven't looked into it yet.
And then maybe this is a question for both Jonathan, you and Stephen. For both the bankruptcy and the SNAP studies, is there any reason to believe that the ACS non-respondents have the same characteristics as those who were matched on the PIC?
Well, there's 3 levels. I mean, there's the respondents. So there's everybody to whom the survey was sent. Then you have the respondents, and then within the respondents, the people you can assign a PIC to. Mm-hmm. And the people to whom you can assign the PIC, the characteristics that were the most, that were the least likely to assign a PIC, those are also the people who answer the ACS and any traditional Census Bureau survey at the lowest rates. So are the non-respondents represented by the people who get picked in the end? I would say not necessarily. But it also, depending on whether you're using Census Bureau weighting and whether the weighting compensates for the non-response patterns, you might come out okay, but it's worth looking at.
Mm-hmm. Just quickly, I would say anyone in the ACS who couldn't receive a PIC probably couldn't receive food stamps, couldn't receive SNAP, just because you're in a need. They're going to be someone who Census Bureau just couldn't find a PIC for, or they couldn't file, or they probably didn't file for personal bankruptcy because they were either not in the country legally or have never worked, and so probably could never actually acquire debt. So it's something. In other issues, we might be more worried about it, but I think in our particular topics, those who couldn't get a PIC in the ACS aren't as worrisome.
And Stephen, this question is probably for you. It came in during your talk about you had listed a lot of the process in terms of putting together this data set, and somebody wondered if there's kind of a summary of those process standards and protocols that would be available for people who might want to do the same type of work, similar type of work.
Right. I could add that onto one of my slides. You could do a search. If you do a search for, and I did this just as a test because somebody might have wanted to know, look for the name Bill Iwig, I-W-I-G, and administrative data. If you match on that, it should take you to his slideshow. And I think Bill Iwig is somewhere in the USDA. So look in his information. And that was actually a cooperative project between Bill and a number of other people, including somebody at Census from the CARA unit. And you could also look at the COPAFS, C-O-P-A-F-S, the COPAFS website, and you can find Bill's presentation there.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Tom, somebody asked, how do you know if the master's degree that people received was in library science, since the field of degree question was just added in 2009? Or do you just make that assumption about in the older?
We don't know that. We make the assumption. That is correct.
Okay.
And also, field of degree is for undergraduate, right?
That's true. Good point. And I guess I have a general question for people who might be interested in matching with internal Census Bureau records on the Social Security number. Is this process generally something that if somebody had a fairly small-scale project, they'd be able to fit this within their budget, or is it always going to be a fairly significant cost to do this type of matching and have someone do that for you in a secure center?
It's not, well, it wasn't, for our 20 million cases, it was under $20,000. So, my guess is that it doesn't scale up or scale down. If you only have 2,000 cases, it's probably going to be, relatively, within that range. But it's, it's for 20 million cases, they gave us the estimate of it was around just under $20,000.
Okay.
Jonathan, how about another cost? How long did it take you to get that project authorized in the RDC network?
It took a little while. The RDCs, when my proposal was under review, was a particularly bad time for review. So these days, it should hopefully only take 2 or 3 months. And then it took a little while for CARA to actually find time and resources to do it. But you do need to plan ahead and be patient when you're working in an RDC.
I would rate 2 or 3 months that would be a very good experience.
The proposals actually get reviewed and approved. But yeah, there are other steps as well. But yeah, I usually, when I was an RDC administrator, I told people to expect it takes at least a year from when you start working on a proposal until you actually get access.
If you wanted to get your other questions to the presenters, feel free to send those to me or send them to the presenters directly. I want to thank the people on the call today, and especially the presenters for taking the time. And I want to thank everyone for participating. We will be in touch soon about the next webinar, which we're planning to be on health insurance sometime in March. So stay tuned for more information.